Hello and welcome to the NFL Rough Draft Walter Football 2025 NFL Fantasy Football Preview Draft Series. So let me give you a little bit of information about who I am and what this is, and I'm going to try to make this quick because you're going to hear this a bunch of times. My whole goal here is to inform you about what to do in your fantasy football drafts while not wasting your time. So first off, I'm Mike Lucchine from the website NFL Rough Draft. We're primarily an NFL draft website. If you've ever seen or listened to Todd McShay's podcast that he's got going on with Steve Mensch, he talks about the Huddle Report Top 100 rankings, and he talks about how he's won that 3 times. Well, it's McShay, Bob McGinn, the legendary retired beat writer for the Green Bay Packers, and us as the only 3-time Huddle Report champions, I believe. I primarily have been an NFL draft guy. I've been on ESPN radio a bunch of times and other places that are similar to that. I used to work for ESPN Stats and Information back in the day. And so knowing every single player that comes into the league every year makes trying to figure out fantasy football kind of easy, right? Because you're only talking about the top players, and trying to discover sleepers and what's going on with camp notes is really pretty easy once you've studied 500 or 600 players every single year who are incoming from college. All right, so that's enough about that. Walt's a great guy. We decided we're going to get you guys ready for the fantasy football season. And what is this video series going to be about? Well, one, I'm going to do regular camp updates. I waited until now to start them because the first few days of camp are not even in full pads. So, you really need to get through the first week or so before you can really start to draw any conclusions at all. And later on, throughout the month of August, we're going to talk about some different strategies. I'll be on with Walt. Some of you guys who are regulars over at Walter Football have probably seen me a bunch of times doing his after-hours show on Tuesday and Thursday nights. And we're gonna get you ready for everything you need to know about the 2025 fantasy football season. Before I get started here, if you have any questions, if there's anything I haven't covered, please feel free to leave it down in the comments here on YouTube. I'll try my best to get back and answer it. Or, you can see my Twitter handle. I'm at NFL Rough Draft. Be more than happy, if you care about my opinion. And if not, that's okay too. There are plenty of people out there giving fantasy football advice. So, all right. Again, I said my whole goal here, all preseason long, is to inform you without wasting your time. We're going to start this series by looking at the notable fantasy football news from the first week of training camp. Today we're going to look at every team in the AFC, and then tomorrow we're going to look at every team in the NFC. We're going to start with the Buffalo Bills. You see I have Ourlads. By the way, Ourlads is fantastic for depth charts. Okay, now nobody has official depth charts released yet. And truthfully, the first couple of depth charts that you see released by NFL teams over the next week or two are to be really taken with a grain of salt. A lot of times, they're not even really compiled by coaches or anybody in the know. They're just the team's media staff. So really, take depth charts with a grain of salt. But I have our lads up here for right now, just to sort of use as a reference point while I'm talking about some of these players. So we're going to start in the AFC East. We're going to start with the Buffalo Bills. The biggest news to come out of Buffalo so far throughout the first week is that it sounds like Khalil Shakir is still the primary target. Okay, he was the most reliable receiver there last year. It sounds like he's picked up right where he's left off. And I guess depending on how you look at it, it's sort of maybe some bad news for some of the other receivers who are there. Specifically Keon Coleman. All right, the reports out of Bills camp have been that Keon Coleman looks like he's a little bit better. He's improved a little bit upon his disappointing rookie season. Remember, he's a guy who wasn't really looked at as someone who's going to create a lot of separation as a receiver, but he's big. He's a former basketball player, played for Michigan State, Division I basketball, and they expected him to win a lot more contested catches than he did last year. Well, it sounds like although he's made a little bit of progress, he's still essentially the same player. Now, that doesn't mean that you should move him down or not draft him at all in fantasy football, especially when it's the first week of camp. But when we're getting to that range of shots that you're going to take on these sort of later round receivers, he's just a little bit less appealing than some of the other players that we might cover in that range that we'll get to with other teams. So for Khalil Shakir, I think his ADP looks safe for right now. It sounds like he's going to pick up right where he left off. Keon Coleman is a little bit scary if you have to use a 9th or 10th round pick on him. I would look to get him later, and he's not going to be there later. And then the other interesting receiver there is Josh Palmer from the Chargers, right? So he was a free agent. The Bills went out early in free agency and gave him a lot of money. And that's a sign that they really like him. Okay, I mean, obviously they gave him a lot of money. It's a sign that they really like him. But what I mean by that is they made a priority to go and get him, I believe it was day one of free agency, if I recall correctly. Now, Palmer, I think the reason why they made it such a priority is he's very good against man coverage, and that's something the rest of their receivers struggle with. So if you wanted another receiver from the Bills offense, it sounds like Josh Palmer, not Keon Coleman, might be the guy you want. Now, the other nice thing about that is you can get Josh Palmer in the 14th or 15th round if you're drafting your best ball leagues today. So take a look at Josh Palmer. The reports out of camp are that he looks good. He's going to play a lot, and he's good against man coverage. So Josh Palmer stock up, Keon Coleman stock down with an asterisk that it's the first week of camp. And then the last player that I want to talk about on this team is Dalton Kincaid, right? Dalton Kincaid had that great rookie year. Rookie tight ends very rarely have great rookie seasons, okay? And he did. But the second year sophomore slump was very real. He was battling a knee injury for a lot of the year, and he's already missed a little bit of that same knee, let me put it this way, has sort of popped up as a concern so far in camp. Now, when I say concern, he's not going to miss time. I believe he was right back at practice the next day. I think he just had a sleeve on his knee. We've heard that throughout the spring, Kincaid has had a big offseason and he's looking like he's improved. That's reason to be optimistic, but I would not move him up only because we don't know what's going on with this knee. It could get in the way. He had a back issue when he was in the draft. He's starting to sort of get the reputation of being a little bit injury prone. So I keep Kincaid where he is. Tight end is really deep this year in redraft meaning a one-year league. So I look at him sort of in a cluster, maybe with Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews, right after some more appealing options like Evan Engram and Tyler Warren, Tucker Kraft, maybe even David Njoku. So Dalton Kincaid, we're kind of hearing mixed things. We're hearing that he looks a little bit better. He's had a good offseason, but at the same time, the same knee that bothered him last year is already starting to flare up in the first week of camp. All right, so we're going to move on from the Bills, and we're going to take a look at our next AFC East team here, which is the Miami Dolphins. There are two things that I want to highlight for the Miami Dolphins. Again, it's only a week into camp. I think they've only had 2 padded practices. One, this is only going to apply to those of you who are in dynasty leagues with really deep rosters. Quinn Ewers, the Texas quarterback, the 7th round pick, the guy who we had in our top 100 over at NFL Rough Draft, even though we knew he wasn't going in the top 100 this year. He's had a very good start to camp. Is he going to replace Tua as the starter? right away or maybe ever? Well, we don't know. Certainly not right away. I mean, that's not happening. But Zach Wilson is the backup right now. Zach Wilson has had a shaky career. Quinn Ewers looks like maybe he might have a shot to sort of ascend as the backup pretty early in the season. And then if you have, a Tua injury, all of a sudden he's right there in the starting role. Now for redraft, for best ball, for one-year leagues, you don't need to know any of that, okay? But if you're in a dynasty league, again, and you have deep rosters, if it's a super flex league in particular, you might want to go throw a $0 bid at him on waivers this week. So Quinn Ewers, and then the other one is Alexander Mattison. Now I know Alexander Mattison is really sort of a mediocre running back. He's nothing to get excited about. But I've spent a large part of the offseason being really hyped up about Jaylen Warren as the primary backup to A-Chain, and really even sort of taking on a smaller role than A-Chain, but more of an everyday presence or every week presence than he had last year as a rookie. Because of course Raheem Mostert is gone, so A-Chain's not going to get 100% of the carries, obviously. However, early indications are that Alexander Mattison might throw a little bit of a wrench into that. Now, I'm not looking at this as a situation where it's Mattison or Jalen Wright as the primary handcuff to A-Chain, but I am looking at it as Mattison might get some short yardage situations. He might get goal line carries, and Jalen Wright might sort of just be the handcuff to A-Chain, but Mattison could end up having a role in that offense regardless. And if that's the case, certainly that makes Jalen Wright a lot less appealing than some of the other high upside handcuff running backs. Even though Jalen Wright was our top-rated running back a couple of years ago when he was in the NFL draft. And it makes Alexander Mattison just slightly appealing in the last round if there are 20 round drafts of best ball. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you should take Alexander Mattison every time you get to the 20th round or anytime you get to the last pick of your best ball drafts. What I am saying is he's not going to be owned in a lot of leagues. So if you're in a best ball league where you can't edit your roster after the draft, well, here's a guy who might have some short yardage value. And in that Dolphins offense, we saw Mostert score, I think, 18 to 20 touchdowns a couple years ago. So if Alexander Mattison has a year where he has 500 yards rushing, but maybe he has 8 to 10 rushing touchdowns, that's someone who might end up helping you more than some of the other players that go in the last round of these drafts. Okay, I think Keenan Allen is still going in the last round of some of these drafts, and he hasn't even signed anywhere yet. So those are the two big things I'm looking at with the Dolphins so far. Again, we're early on in camp. All right, we're going to move on. We're going to go to the Patriots. Obviously, there are two big stories here. Running back situation, Travion Henderson versus Ramondre Stevenson. Travion Henderson has been as billed so far. He looks like he's going to get some early season work. And a lot of times what ends up holding back rookie running backs from playing as much early on, it's not their talent as a runner, it's their value in the passing game. Travion Henderson is stepping into the league day one as an excellent pass protector who can also catch passes. So if Travion Henderson is there in the 5th round of your fantasy draft, he's almost an automatic click if you need a running back as far as I'm concerned. Stevenson, you can see here, is still the projected starter. I expect that to change very quickly. The receiving pecking order. Well, it's nice to see Stephon Diggs is already practicing, which is a little bit of a surprise at the beginning of their training camp. He's going to start, obviously, and Pop Douglas is going to be in the slot. So he's got some intriguing late round value in best ball. The other starting receiver right now is Kayshon Boutte, But Kyle Williams has had a very impressive start to camp. Of course, he was sort of the en vogue rookie wide receiver once we got closer to the draft, once we got to April, and he moved. The perception is that he moved up a lot of boards. He's picked up, and it looks like he's sort of picked up where he left off, and he's validating his draft position. So I expect Kyle Williams to be the starter over Kayshon Boutte. If not by week 1, then pretty early on in the season. So that's someone, as we get closer to redraft season, you might be able to get a little bit of a value on him, right? You might be able to get him around the 10th round, and then that's someone who, for the second half of the season, you might be able to plug into your lineup, and that's going to potentially look really good for you, especially with the young quarterback Drake May having a year under his belt. He's a candidate to take a huge step forward, obviously, and Josh McDaniels is a giant upgraded offensive coordinator. All right, so that's the Patriots. Let's close out the AFC East here with New York Jets. I don't have a lot that I want to talk about with the Jets for today. You saw that Garrett Wilson got the big contract right before he started camp. He's obviously going to be a target monster there. Mason Taylor was almost a first-round pick. A lot of people thought that he might go in the first round, is locked in as that top tight end. He's had a very impressive start to camp. Now, if you're looking at best ball, he's a really solid tight end too. Okay, you're going to be able to get him after round 10 for sure. And even in redraft, you might be able to pick him up after a couple of weeks. He is, again, a rookie tight end, and they don't typically have the best rookie seasons. But he's certainly been impressive to start camp. He's someone that you should put a star next to and consider late in drafts, because he could pay off in the second half of the season as well. The other interesting tidbit, I suppose, about this team is last year, everybody kind of thought Braylon Allen was going to be the direct handcuff to Breece Hall, and that wasn't really the case. It was sort of a mix of Allen and Isaiah Davis. And from what it sounds like, Allen is pretty clearly ahead of Davis to start camp, and it looks like he's kind of taken a step forward this year as well. Now, Braylon Allen came into the league last year as a 20-year-old. Okay, he was really young. So if he's used this offseason to improve, you're looking at somebody who you could get in the 12th, 13th, 14th round. And if he's clearly ahead of Isaiah Davis, now all of a sudden you're looking at, are the Jets going to be competitive this year? Probably not. Breece Hall is starting to get expensive. Does he get traded? We already heard rumblings of that around the NFL draft. He's certainly a trade deadline candidate, in my opinion. If the Jets get off to a slow start, well, you might end up with a starting running back without even needing Breece Hall to get injured if you draft Braylon Allen in the 13th or 14th round. So I'm going to continue to sort of monitor what's going on in the news out of Jets camp with that situation. But Hall is really moving up as one of my top priority handcuff running backs here in the last week of July. All right, so that closes out the AFC East. Let's get to the AFC North, and we've got the Baltimore Ravens. All right, for the Baltimore Ravens, the big story here, I was intrigued to see if somehow Mark Andrews got traded in sort of a surprise August deal. We heard that he was on the trade block back in April, again before the NFL draft, and we've heard all kinds of rumors that they love Isaiah Likely. Likely is, he's going to get a big contract extension, and we saw what he's capable of week 1 last year, and a couple of other times throughout his career as well. Well, let's throw some cold water on that now. Isaiah Likely got hurt yesterday. He's going to have surgery. He's projected to miss about 6 weeks. That's going to obviously cut into the regular season, and Mark Andrews is still there. Okay, so I'm thinking that this is a team that if they were considering trading Andrews, they're probably not anymore. They're obviously looked at as being a top contender to make it to the Super Bowl. Really, for me, this moves Mark Andrews up a couple of rounds, and he's now in that sort of range that I mentioned earlier with Kincaid. Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid. This year you could draft one of those guys to be your tight end 1, but you could draft them as like tight end 12, tight end 13. Okay, so keep an eye on Mark Andrews. All right, that's enough for the Baltimore Ravens. We're going to go over to the Cincinnati Bengals next. 2 big stories there. One, Zach Moss was released today. Unfortunately, his career might be over. He's got a neck injury, but that really helps Taj Brooks. Okay, Taj Brooks, the rookie running back, is looked at as being a handcuff. Now, I still think Samaje Perine could have an annoying role, sort of like Ty Johnson with the Buffalo Bills in that offense. Okay, they trust Perine in pass protection. He's earned that trust, right? He was there. They know him very well. But Taj Brooks could really come into play here if something happens to Chase Brown during the season and they decide not to bring in another veteran. The other piece of news with the Bengals is just that Jermaine Burton, last year's 3rd round pick, it was a little bit of a surprise in the 3rd round because he had a lot of character issues. He was not in our top 100, but it looked like we were going to be right about him not belonging in the top 100 last year. He got in a lot of trouble. It sounds like maybe he's gotten himself together and he's had a strong spring and he's picked up where he left off. Now, this is an explosive offense with a defense that isn't that good. That's a great combination for fantasy football. You could do a lot worse than Jermaine Burton as a late round target in your best ball drafts and really even in your redraft leagues. Okay, so this guy you don't have to pick until the 18th, 19th, 20th round, but he's interesting for sure there. So I would downgrade Andre Yoshivas as I guess sort of a result of that. And again, we're talking about late round guys here. All right, moving on. Cleveland Browns. Big thing here is obviously the running back situation. So Judkins hasn't signed yet. All the 2nd round picks had those issues with, they want fully guaranteed contracts, so a bunch of them didn't sign their deals right away. Well, Judkins got himself in some trouble in the meantime, and so now the Browns are kind of playing hardball. I think it's hard to speculate on things like this. Obviously, it's serious. You shouldn't be hitting women, obviously. Part of me kind of thinks that this is going to get resolved at some point in the next month, though. Judkins is falling to the 9th, 10th, 11th round. He's a lot more talented than a 9th, 10th, or 11th round pick. That's where you're starting to take some of the high upside handcuffs, and you might not even need an injury, right? I mean, if Judkins just signs, he's going to end up being a starter at some point early in the season, even though Jerome Ford's penciled in there. Dylan Sampson's ADP has moved up. The guy, I like him. I think I like these young Tennessee running backs. We had him as a day 2 pick on our draft site, and he fell to day 3. So keep an eye on him, but look at him late because again, I think people are looking at the Judkins situation a little bit short-sighted. It was terrible what he did, but Joe Mixon had a long career and he was on tape doing something very similar. Kareem Hunt's still in the league, same deal. All right, so and the other deal with the Cleveland Browns is it sounds like Cedric Tillman's off to a good start in camp. So that's some good news right there. All right, up next, we've got the Pittsburgh Steelers. Okay, the Pittsburgh Steelers I kind of look at them as a boring team. All right, they're an offense that I'm largely going to be avoiding this year. I think they're going to play good defense, and they're not going to run a lot of plays. Arthur Smith has been very vocal about how he hates fantasy football. He likes to give every player on the field 4 targets. Caleb Johnson is the guy to watch here. I would just caution you to not get too excited about Caleb Johnson in redraft leagues. Here's the reason why. When Arthur Smith was the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons and his job was on the line, they drafted Bijan Robinson with the 8th pick of the draft. And he was going in the 1st round of redraft leagues. Well, he eased him in. And it was the right decision for the organization. Okay, what a lot of people don't understand is rookie running backs aren't used to playing 17 games. They just don't play that much in college. Okay, and now we've got the college football playoffs, so they could play a little bit more than they used to in the past. But you don't want to spend a top draft pick on a running back and then completely run him into the ground as a rookie. Okay, that doesn't look good for the coach. It doesn't look good for the GM. It's how you get fired. And Arthur Smith gave Algier a lot of run that year with the Falcons. Okay, so I kind of expect to see a little bit of a cautious approach with Caleb Johnson. I'm not saying that he's not going to emerge at some point this year, but I think a lot of people are expecting him to be a bell cow week 1 and all the way through week 17. We've seen that it just doesn't really work. You look back at Dameon Pierce, the running back for the Houston Texans. As a rookie, they ran him into the ground, and he broke down in the second half of the season and just hasn't been the same ever since. I think teams try not to do that. So that's the deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Aside from that, I was looking at Roman Wilson. He had a really good Senior Bowl practice a couple of years ago before he was injured last year and missed his entire rookie season. Sounds like he's had a quiet start to camp. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, but he's someone who I was looking at late in best ball drafts, and I don't want to say that I'm off of him now, but certainly there are other players that are a little bit more exciting when it comes to those late round receivers right now. I was looking for him to show up and have a good start to camp, but that's definitely a situation that we'll continue to monitor. All right, so we're doing our AFC draft preview for fantasy football. We covered the AFC East today. Okay, we covered the AFC North today. We have the AFC South and the AFC West, and then we're going to get to the NFC after that. Thanks for joining us. I know we're going over a week of camp news all in one day. We're going to do this more frequently now that camp has started, and the videos will be a lot shorter. Again, I'm trying to get you as much information as I can in as little time as I can. So thanks for checking us out, and stay tuned for the AFC West and the AFC South previews.